Hi, my name is Nina, and I'm here to present pop music in Japan. Now, we're going to go all the way back to the 1920s, where there was Ryūkōka and jazz from the 1920s to 1960s. Then in the 1960s, there was Kayōkyoku and Enka. From 1970s to 1980s, that includes new music, rock, city pop, and the golden age of idols. The 1990s with the rise of J-pop. The 2000s, including hip-hop, R&B, Neofolk, Shibuya-Kei, and Seiyū. And lastly, for the 2010s, there is AKB48 and the Hallyu Wave. So to start things off, Ryūkōka, this music genre was traced back to the Taisho period, and it means the popular music. Now, due to foreign influence, this music genre did incorporate Western influences of jazz and blues, and it included the instruments such as the harmonica, strings, and guitar. However, this music genre did use the pentatonic scale, which was the Japanese traditional scale. And this genre itself has split up into Enka and Popsu genres. Next is jazz. Again, due to foreign influence, Western jazz and blues became popular in the early 1920s up until World War II, when it was banned by the government in favor of war songs that included traditional marches. However, after the war, jazz did return to the music scene during the occupation of Japan due to the presence of the US Army. And jazz itself has had a large impact on the music genre popsu. Next is Kayōkyoku, which was the fusion of Japanese composition with Western elements, and it had a blend of Japanese and Western scales. This music genre was known to be the true origin of modern J-pop, and although Kayōkyoku and Enka were the most popular music genres in Japan during the 1960s, there was also the rock and roll movement known as rockabilly that began in the late 1950s, and it included, of course, Elvis Presley and the Beatles. There was such a presence of the rock and roll movement that the Drifters, a Japanese group, gained popularity in the late 1960s. There was also Wasei Pops, which is referred to as pop music made in Japan, and it includes Q Sakamoto's Sukiyaki, which had reached #1 in the US, and the Peanuts song Don't Turn Around, which was included in the movie Mothra. Next we have is Enka. This music genre resembles the traditional Japanese music Ryūkōka from the Taisho period. In the post-war era, it has become more of a form of sentimental ballad music. And an interesting fact is Enka singer Keiko Fuji established an all-time record history on Japanese Oricon charts by saying #1 for 20 weeks in 1970s. And she was able to make Enka into a more modern form, and she is also known to be the one to have revived this genre. Now on to the 1970s to 1980s. We have new music, and this music genre shifted from the simple folk songs to a more complex musical arrangement. It focused more on personal messages rather than social, and being a singer-songwriter was key. The most noteworthy was Yosui Inou's Kori no Sekai, his album that stayed at the top of Oricon charts for 35 weeks. And there was also many notable female singer-songwriters of new music, such as Yumi Matsutoya, formerly known as Yumi Arai, Miyuki Nakajima, Ami Ozaki, and Junko Yagami. The next genre we have is rock. Rock did remain underground in the early 1970s until Japanese band Happy End fused this music genre and traditional Japanese music, and it became mainstream. Other musicians began to experiment with electronic music, which was quite interesting considering that both rock and electronic music were pioneers in Japan. Japan's rock scene did flourish in the 1980s, with many male and female bands breaking records in the music charts, and during the late 1980s, there was the creation of Visual-Kei, a subgenre of rock, and is most notable for its appearance in theatrics with androgynous clothing, big hair, and makeup. This subgenre was founded by X Japan, one of Japan's most famous rock bands. Next we have is city pop. This music genre became a popular trend during the 1980s. It had electronic elements and jazz fusion, and it focused on urban and big city living themes. This musical genre itself is quite particular because it did reflect the tech and economic boom in Japan of the 70s and 80s, and it correlated as well with the burst of the Japanese bubble when it declined. Some famous singers of the city pop was Tatsuro Yamashita and Maria Takeuchi. And interestingly, since the 2010s, city pop has experienced a resurgence internationally. In the 1970s and 1980s as well was the golden age of idols. During the 1970s, there was a surge in popularity of female idol singers. The first well-known was Momoe Yamaguchi, as she became the first artist to use a special type of pronunciation that was similar to English, and she was able to separate Kayōkyoku and modern J-pop. Now, with this golden age of idols, there became this concept of the wholesome image, having the girl next door charm. Now, by the 1980s, the era of the idol or female singer exploded, with many notable idols such as Seiko Matsuda, Akina Nakamori, Kyoko Koizumi, Naoko Kawai, and Yu Hayami. And thus, with the golden age of idols, this also marked the end of the Kayōkyoku era. Now into the 1990s, this was the rise of J-pop. At this point, J-pop had become an economic superpower. Japan had the second largest music industry in the world behind the United States, and it was due to the clever marketing techniques pairing songs with media outlets such as commercials, movies, video games, anime, and etc. In the 1990s, there was also the Being Agency, which was also known as the Being System, and it created groups like BZ, Wands, Zard, and Maki Oguro, which in turn had become best-selling artists and groups. Some of these groups did focus on harder or folk rock elements, but then over time, some did switch to the Euro-style dance music. Another noteworthy artist or person in the 1990s was Tetsuya Komuro. He was the invincible producer of the dance movement. He produced signature electronic dance acts that were performed by the unofficial Komuro family, such as Namie Amuro, Ami Suzuki, Tomomi Kahala, and Hitomi. And he is considered the most successful producer in Japanese history, with having 170 million copies sold. Now, in the 1990s, there was also the popular trend of Eurobeat and trance that began in the same decade, and this was also the time when CD formats were changing from 8 centimeters to 12 centimeters. Eurobeat-oriented groups dominated the charts, while remixes of popular songs were high-selling. There was an idol resurgence in the late 90s, now including singer-songwriter Hikaru Utada, who happened to be the daughter of the Enka legend Keiko Fuji, and she debuted her R&B album First Love that sold over 7 million copies in 1999 and became the best-selling album of that year. There was also Ayumi Hamasaki, who had massive success between 1999 and 2004. And she became the best-selling female artist of all time in Japan. Like the Being System, there was also Johnny's and Associates, which was known to be the male idol factory in the late 1990s. They've created groups such as SMAP, Arashi, Heisei Jump, Takin Tsubasa, News, and Katoon. And each group was able to form various levels of massive success into the 2000s. Now in the 2000s, there was hip-hop and R&B. And while they were present in the 1990s, they did gain mainstream attraction in the beginning of the 21st century. R&B duo Chemistry had success in 2001 with their album The Way We Are, which sold over 1.12 million copies in the first week and debuted #1 on Oricon weekly album charts. Male group Exile made their debut and became the faces of J-Urban. There was Namie Amuro again, this time with the release of Queen of Hip Hop album, and this album was a fusion between J-pop and hip hop, and with this album she was able to reestablish herself in 2005. There was also Kumi Kodak, and with her release of her first best album, Best First Things, she was able to depict a different image from the wholesome image that kind of displayed more a heightened sexuality known as ero kakoi. And lastly, there was Ken Hirai, a pop and R&B singer who topped the Oricon Yearly album in 2006 with the release of 10th anniversary complete single collection 95 to 05 Utabaka, with his single Pop Star becoming one of the biggest hits from that album. Also in the 2000s was Neofolk, and this music genre was reminiscent of the glory days in the 1960s and 70s. Folk duos such as 19, Yuzu, and Kobukuro became popular. Kobukuro specifically had their first best album, All Singles Best, be the first multi-million seller by a male act. And another album of theirs, 5296, did break the Ayumi Hamasaki's #1 album streak in 2008. Next we have is Shibuya-Kei. This music genre incorporated characteristics of city pop, but also includes other mesh of genres such as indie pop, soul, jazz, and etc. It reflects the eclectic and youthful nature of Shibuya, Tokyo. And a notable artist of this genre is Yasutaka Nakata. She's a member of the electronic duo Capsule, and she has also produced the female idol group Perfume. And Perfume now is known to be the first techno pop band to achieve #1 album in 25 years after Yellow Magic Orchestra in 1983. There's also Seiyū, and this refers to anime voice actors. Nana Mizuki's album Ultimate Diamond became the first voice actor album to reach #1 on Oricon charts in 2009, and one of the most famous Seiyū is Hatsune Miku. She is considered a Vocaloid, which is a voice synthesizer software, and she was created in 2007 after the sampling of voice actress Saki Fujita. In 2010, the album Exit Tunes Presents Vocalogenesis featuring Hatsune Miku became the first album featuring Vocaloids to reach #1 in Oricon charts. There is also Hokago Tea Time, which is based on a fictional female band from the anime K-On!, and it released an album, mini album in 2009, and it actually ended up being the first album by anime characters to reach #1. Now, finally, we've reached the 2010s, and since the end of the 2000s, there have been more and more idol groups emerging, and it became known as the Idol Sengoku Jidai, which referred to actually the high number of idol groups in the Japanese entertainment industry. One of the more well-known idol groups is AKB48. Back in 2005, producer Yasushi Akimoto wanted to form a girl group as idols you can meet. And the way they developed this was selecting girls through regular auditions with their ages ranging from early teens to over 20 years. Currently, AKB48 has split into several teams, and it allows these teams to perform simultaneously, and currently there are about 106 members only in AKB48. An interesting thing about this idol group is that members can graduate from the group and then be replaced by promoted trainees, so that it keeps kind of the group going. And this concept has become so popular that it has expanded to other regions of Japan, as well as countries such as China, Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, and India. The last thing I want to talk about is the Hallyu Wave, which is translated to the Korean Wave and refers to the rise of the South Korean culture, including K-dramas and K-pop. In the early 2000s, Boa was the first Korean breakout star in Japan since World War II, and she was able to open the door of the Hallyu Wave to other Korean artists. Then there was male group Toho Shinki, who made their Japanese debut in 2005, but did not gain success until their 16th single, Purple Line, in 2008. They ended up being the first male foreign group to top the charts and the first Korean group to perform in Tokyo Dome. Other successful K-pop groups ended up joining the Japanese market, such as Kara, Girls' Generation, Big Bang, Super Junior, Shiny, 21, and etc. and they tend to have either Japanese versions of their original song or sing new songs in Japanese. Now, there are newer, successful K-pop groups that continue to promote in Japan and South Korea due to the success and popularity of the Hallyu Wave. Now, this is the end of my presentation, and I just want to say thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys enjoyed and learned a lot from this. Thank you.